I've noticed a recurring trend that whenever I respond to a death battle, the next response video is related to Pokemon. Hey guys, it's the Metal Blade 5, and welcome to my response to WatchMojo's Yu-Gi-Oh! Vs. Pokemon video. Although I personally think Pokemon vs. Yu-Gi-Oh! Sounds better. I've wanted to do this video for the past 3 months now, since I feel very passionate about what I want to discuss. So of course this video pits the two franchises of Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon against each other to see which is better. And I have a lot of experience with both series. For Pokemon, of course, you can see the tons of Pokemon videos I've made on this channel. And for Yu-Gi-Oh!, as I stated in my Yu-Gi-Oh! Theory, I was obsessed with when I was a kid as I watched the anime all the time and collected a lot of the trading cards. So due to the fact that both of these series were prominent parts of my childhood, and because they have a bit of a similar concept with monsters fighting each other, when I saw the video come up in the YouTube sidebar, I was very intrigued, even if it was a WatchMojo video. Now, as you can guess by the fact that I'm making a response to this, is that I found a few problems with this video, whether it be to WatchMojo's reasoning, things they failed to mention, or the biggest issue I have being that a lot of things in this video I personally found to be entirely up to personal opinion when it comes to which is better. And cutting to the chase, Pokemon wins.
Yugi lost!
For this video, WatchMojo determined that Pokemon was better based on 5 categories, and as such, I'll be going through each of these categories as well. So with that, it's time to duel! So first off, it's the monsters. Now this I find to be the most prominent case of these categories being up to personal opinion, as Pokemon and Duel monsters are drastically different from each other. The major thing being how they're designed. Duel monsters are designed to look like, well, monsters, as the vast majority of them are done in a more darker and serious tone to show off how cool and threatening a lot of them look. Meanwhile, Pokemon are done in a more chibi style, I guess, as they are designed to look more cartoony and lighthearted. And while there are some darker looking Pokemon like Darkrai and Giratina, the majority of them are done in the more anime-esque style. Well, except that. If we were to compare the monster mascots of each series, being Dark Magician and Pikachu respectively, then you can see how different they are, even with them being different species. This even extends to a lot of the legendary Pokemon, as even though they are made to be more threatening, they still look drastically different to, say, the Egyptian gods. The only dual monster I could potentially see passing as a Pokemon is Karibo, but even then that's a stretch. Furthermore, the reason for each franchise's monsters being the way they are simply has to do with the fact that Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Have different target demographics. Pokemon is aimed for children, so the Pokemon are designed to appeal to kids. Meanwhile, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is aimed towards teenagers. Well, it was supposed to be, so dual monsters are nothing like what you would see in the Pokemon universe. As for which I personally think are better, I can't really say because they do things so differently to each other that I find it hard to compare. As for what WatchMojo says during this part of the video, all they really talk about is how both franchises' monsters have a large variety and are iconic, which I agree with. However, I disagree with their statement on that you want to catch them all with Pokemon, because I've never wanted to catch them all, as there are now 802 Pokemon. But in the end, WatchMojo states that
Yu-Gi-Oh! May have a more well-rounded monster compendium, but they just aren't as iconic or lovable as the pocket monsters.
Pikachu! Pikachu!
Everyone has their favorite Pokemon, and the same can't quite be said for Yu-Gi-Oh!
So Pokemon wins this round because they're more iconic. Just because something is more iconic doesn't mean it's better. Have you ever heard of the word overrated? I'm not saying the Pokemon is overrated or anything, but there is a clear concept that being iconic doesn't necessarily make you good. Also, dual monsters aren't cute? WatchMojo, you're clearly forgetting about a certain monster, and it's a pretty iconic one at that. Dark Magician Girl, or Black Magician Girl if you're Japanese. I mean, come on, everybody goes on about Dark Magician Girl being cute, and even the anime has acknowledged this. Some people even have her as their waifu, which I always thought was a bit weird because, you know, she's a fucking card! And as for the statement that everybody has a favorite Pokemon, I'm pretty sure that isn't the case. I know they're referring to a general audience, but I'm pretty sure even a general audience wouldn't all have a favorite Pokemon, since there's a lot of people that don't like Pokemon. I mean, my best friend doesn't give a shit about Pokemon at all, so I doubt that he would have a favorite. Finally, when saying that not everybody has a favorite Duel monster, I do have a favorite Yu-Gi-Oh monster. Do you want to know what it is?
How about a warm welcome for my Red Eyes Black Dragon?
Yes, Red Eyes Black Dragon is my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh monster. Purely because of its design. When I was a kid, I would always fangasm every time it was summoned. For the next round, it's the trading card games. Now, as you can guess, this goes to Yu-Gi-Oh! Mainly because it's already based on a card game. This category is going to be a little bit tough to talk about, as I've never played the Pokemon trading card game because it's so oddly complex in my opinion. My sister used to collect them, but I had no idea how the game worked. So naturally, between the two, I prefer Yu-Gi-Oh! When it comes to the card game, but there's a lot of stuff WatchMojo doesn't talk about here in regards to both games. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a wide variety of cards and mechanics compared to the Pokemon trading card game, which, as far as I'm aware, only really focuses on the specific Pokemon and some tokens or whatever. Meanwhile, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has monster cards of various types like normal and effect monsters, along with spell and trap cards to provide assistance. Furthermore, you had the various summoning mechanics. Back when I collected the cards, the only special types of summoning were fusion and ritual summons. However, now there are synchro summons, Xyz summons, and pendulum summons. Also, WatchMojo fails to bring up all of the different archetype monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! Which can develop a large amount of strategy in the game. For example, when I discovered Blackwing monsters, I instantly fell in love with them because of how their effects work off each other so well. And I had a similar experience when I found Naturia and Wind-Up monsters. However, that could potentially be an issue with Yu-Gi-Oh! For players who might be just getting into the card game, as they could potentially be overwhelmed by the number of mechanics. When I first heard of Synchro, Xyz, and Pendulum summons, I was so confused. I managed to catch on to them quickly, but of course, I'm not everybody, and it could potentially take a lot of time to form an effective strategy for a deck. As for the Pokemon trading card game, while I don't understand it, it seems that it's a little more streamlined, which might make it more appealing for new players. When it comes to the card game tournaments, I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Has the upper hand since it gets a bit more notoriety, as sometimes they hold these live duels between the voice actors as their respective characters. Again, this is another case in which I think it's all up to personal opinion, as both card games work so differently, but I think that Yu-Gi-Oh! Would be a bit easier to understand. Especially if you've seen the anime where they say every card's effect every time it's used.
I'll begin by activating my Pot of Greed. This lets me draw 2 more cards.
I play the magic card Pot of Greed. It allows me to draw 2 cards from my deck.
Pot of Greed lets me draw 2 cards.
I'll play this, my Pot of Greed, a magic card that allows me to draw 2 more cards from my deck.
I play Pot of Greed. You know what that means, don't you?
Speaking of the anime, that's what the next round is, and this round goes to Yu-Gi-Oh! As well. Admittedly, I do think that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the better anime, but there's plenty of ways in which someone may prefer Pokemon instead. Now, the only series of Yu-Gi-Oh! That I've seen are the original and GX, because I actually didn't hear about 5D, Zexal, and Arc 5 until a year ago, but I still have a lot to talk about with this section. The main difference between the Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime is that when it comes to the battles, Pokemon is all done in real time, with the Pokemon moving across the battlefield, dodging attacks, and so on, which makes it much more dynamic and action-focused. Meanwhile, with Yu-Gi-Oh!, like the card game, the duels are all turn-based, so it's much slower than a Pokemon battle, but with more strategy involved. In fact, an issue with the original series is that some duels could drag on a bit too long, sometimes spanning over 4 or 5 episodes. When it comes to story, I definitely think Yu-Gi-Oh! Has the upper hand, as it's far more developed and complex than Pokemon, which is just Ash wanting to be the very best, like no one ever was, and writing over 900 episodes around that premise. Plus, there is one thing about Yu-Gi-Oh! Which WatchMojo completely ignores in this category, being the English dub of the anime. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is notorious for having a bad English dub, not because of the voice actors, since the English voices are so iconic, but because of all the censorship made by 4Kids. As I said earlier, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is aimed towards teenagers, however 4Kids had to make it 4 kids, and severely toned down or removed the dark and mature elements of the anime. For example, they censored a lot of the cards, which in turn affected the trading card game. They removed guns and instead had characters point, and the biggest of all being that they replaced death with the Shadow Realm. Granted, when Pokemon was dubbed by 4Kids, there were also a number of stupid changes such as the jelly-filled donuts, but it wasn't as serious as Yu-Gi-Oh! Where they just added in random story elements that weren't in the Japanese version. When I was a kid, I didn't know Yu-Gi-Oh! Was a Japanese thing, so I wasn't aware of this censorship until I got older, but when I found out, I thought, this is fucking stupid. Granted, I still have a soft spot for the English dub because it's what I grew up with, but it's still stupid in my opinion. I find it especially weird that this wasn't mentioned since WatchMojo made a video of the top 10 worst anime dubs, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Was number 3. They could be going off the Japanese versions, but all the clips used in this video are from the English dub, except for one clip of Zexal, which is in Japanese. Another major element of the anime that WatchMojo completely fails to mention is the movies. For the Pokemon movies, as I literally just went through them all, except for one, some have been good, while others have been bad or decent. And as for the Yu-Gi-Oh! Movies, with the original movie, it was literally the same experience as Pokemon, the first movie for me, where I liked it when I was a kid, but then realized how bad it was when I got older. As for the second movie, Bonds Beyond Time, which is a crossover between the original series GX and 5Ds, I found it enjoyable to watch, but it does have a number of flaws, with the main one being the plot, since it's full of holes. Keep in mind that I'm making this before the Dark Side of Dimensions comes out in English, and I haven't seen it in Japanese, but when it comes to the movies, I would actually give it to Pokemon because there have been more decent ones. As for what WatchMojo actually talks about, they mentioned how with Pokemon, the anime moves at a snail's pace. I don't necessarily know if they're referring to the number of episodes in the anime or the amount of filler, but we'll just go off of that. Pokemon could drag on a lot as it takes like 3 years for Ash to reach the end of one region, but as for filler, while Pokemon probably has the most filler of any anime, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is guilty of that as well. Yu-Gi-Oh! Does have quite a number of filler episodes. Hell, there are even entire story arcs, which are filler, such as the Virtual World arc and Capsule Monsters, which literally was just Pokemon. I mean, even Waking the Dragons, which is my favorite story arc of the original series, was filler. And I know a lot of people don't like that arc, but I personally did because of how particularly dark it was. Even the English dub was still kind of dark because, you know, Yugi loses his soul. On the subject of dark and mature elements, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is more serious, while Pokemon is a bit more comedic. I mean, Yu-Gi-Oh! Does have its fair share of comedic moments as well, but not as prevalent as Pokemon. Even GX was more serious than the entire Pokemon anime, and to be fair, unlike most people, I actually like GX, but I will admit that it was still pretty ridiculous.
What was I thinking? I didn't want to get married. Oh boy, Spark Woman's never going to forgive me. Guy Patch, this didn't happen, okay?
How about you two guys get over here right now, or I'll tell the entire town!
Whenever Pokemon is dark, I actually wish that the rest of the anime followed that kind of tone. I had a blast watching the Team Flare arc at the end of XYZ because of how dark and mature it was compared to the rest of the anime, which made it really epic in my opinion. Furthermore, I've been enjoying Pokemon Generations, and seeing how it adapts iconic moments from the games and is more mature, I wish that the regular anime was like that. Although, Generations has also had some dumb moments.
As long as I have the blue orb, Kyogre will do my bidding.
But lastly, one thing that I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Definitely has over Pokemon is that you at least get a protagonist who actually is the very best, as Yugi is the king of games, while Ash... yeah. Plus, with Yu-Gi-Oh! You get a different protagonist each series, which makes it easier to jump into the anime, unlike a Pokemon where it can potentially call back to things from ages ago, such as Ash's Charizard appearing various times throughout the series, all the way from Johto. And with Ash turning into a fucking idiot at the beginning of every region.
Attract didn't work!
You're right. By any chance, does your Snivy happen to be a female?
Of course! I totally forgot!
I mean, even Jaden is more competent than Ash. And Jaden is a freaking idiot outside of dueling. And then...
This is Pokemon School, where Pokemon and students all study together.
they turned the series into a comedy where Ash goes to school. And the art style received a massive downgrade. You know what? Fuck the anime. Just fuck the anime. Yu-Gi-Oh! Wins. Finally getting to the next category, it's the video games, and of course this goes to Pokemon. Now, out of all the categories in this video, I think that this is the least problematic when it comes to WatchMojo's reasoning. They're actually pretty good at explaining it here. With the main series Pokemon games, I think they're a bit easier to get to grips with. I don't have much experience with the Yu-Gi-Oh! Video games, as the only one I played is Legacy of the Duelist on the PS4, but if that game is anything to go off of, you do need quite the understanding of Yu-Gi-Oh! To play well. When it came to playing through the 5Ds and Zexal campaigns, at the beginning of every duel I would have to check every card in my hand and read the description in order to understand what they do, since I had never seen them before. Plus, with all the Pokemon games, you have the spin-offs as well. While, as I've said before, the only Pokemon spin-offs I played as a kid were Battle Revolution and Pokepark, which suck, and the only other spin-off I played and enjoyed is Pokken Tournament, I'm aware that, as WatchMojo says, they provide a large diversity of games and game styles, making them more accessible to people who may not be interested in the main series. While Yu-Gi-Oh! For the most part sticks with the card game as the basis for the gameplay. The only thing that I thought was worth mentioning in this part was that Yu-Gi-Oh! Games do have more strategy to them because of everything I mentioned about the card game earlier, while Pokemon is a bit more limited compared to other RPGs, as you're only allowed 6 Pokemon who can each only know 4 moves. Good on you, WatchMojo! You actually made a decent argument here. However, the same can't be said for the final round, being the impact, or to be more accurate, which series is more famous. This is how Pokemon wins in the end, and again, like I said before, just because something is more iconic doesn't mean it's better. I mean, of course Pokemon is going to win in a popularity contest because it's more famous and well-known. Pokemon is being referenced and parodied in tons of other forms of media, while the only time I've seen Yu-Gi-Oh! Referenced in pop culture is one time on The Simpsons when Lisa mentions it, which you show in the video. While they do bring up the Abridged series, I personally wouldn't include it as part of Yu-Gi-Oh's legacy since it's a fan-made series, even if it is hilarious. This round is the deciding factor for this video, and while I'll give them props for not making it a tie, I think that saying that Pokemon is better than Yu-Gi-Oh! Just because it's more famous is dumb. Plus, WatchMojo talks about people getting addicted to Pokemon Go, which I think is a bit of a moot point now, since Pokemon Go's popularity has severely declined in the past couple of months. Especially after this one update was made which prevents you from using Pokestops while traveling in a car or something, which, to me and many others, was the only effective way of accessing them, since according to the game, I live in the middle of nowhere. I'm not accusing WatchMojo of doing this, but to me, this last round comes across as if they were just rising on Pokemon's popularity, as this video was made before Sun and Moon came out, by making it the winner. It's like, well, we know this video is going to get hated since we're saying one of these franchises is definitely better than the other, so let's just pick the one that's more popular so we get less dislikes. And that's why I find these kind of debates dumb. Like with the Overwatch versus TF2 debate I mentioned in the previous response, it really is just up to personal preference in the end, and by believing that if you like one series, then you automatically hate the other for some reason. Plus, there were other aspects of Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! That they could have covered but just ignored. The biggest one in my opinion being the manga, as Yu-Gi-Oh! Started off as a manga, like most anime, and the Pokemon manga is a very popular form of Pokemon media. I haven't read either of them, so I can't say which I think is better, but all I know is that Yu-Gi-Oh! Didn't start off with card games until around volume 7, I think, and with Pokemon there's all sorts of manga series. The other one, which you could possibly include with the anime, but I feel that this applies to both series overall, is the characters, in which I would personally give it to Yu-Gi-Oh! As more of its characters experience character development and are far more relatable, particularly Kaiba. Now, as to which series I personally prefer, I would say Pokemon, but my reason is that I have had more experience with the series overall. You see, and I have never mentioned this to anyone before, but after GX ended, or more specifically Season 3, since the last season wasn't dubbed, which made me think that Jaden was dead for years, I started to get embarrassed about my obsession with Yu-Gi-Oh! And completely shut myself off from the series. I didn't watch the anime again for years, and I completely hid my cards and still can't find them. This resulted in me not hearing about Yu-Gi-Oh! For a very long time, and the few times I did, I would immediately feel embarrassed again. In fact, I actually didn't get back into Yu-Gi-Oh! Until this time last year when I found a video on YouTube of Yugi vs. Jaden at the end of Season 4 of GX, in which seeing all their monsters again brought back a lot of memories, in which I then started to see my obsession with Yu-Gi-Oh! As more of a nostalgic part of my childhood, rather than something to be embarrassed about. But that reason is specific to myself, so of course I can't definitively say Pokemon is better than Yu-Gi-Oh! Because I had nothing to do with the series for the past 8 or 9 years or so. Finally, to end off this video, I have a personal anecdote about both series. As I've said several times on this channel, when I first came across Pokemon from my sister watching the anime, I didn't like it, partially because I thought Yu-Gi-Oh! Was better, as it was the first anime I saw. So one day, me and my sister got into an argument over which was better, in which I actually challenged her to a duel with my Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards against her Pokemon cards, but she just left. And after that moment, I always looked back on it and thought, how would Pokemon versus Yu-Gi-Oh! Work? Pokemon don't have attack and defense points, and dual monsters don't have type weaknesses and resistances. And I think that perfectly sums up the issue with the video. While both series have a similar premise, they do things so differently that I think they're both hard to compare and say which is better. But with that, I'll see you guys for my next response video. And I think it's time that I got back to talking about bad reviews. All I have left to say is that, WatchMojo, you fucked up.
That's right, you messed with the wrong show. We're not just anyone, we're Yu-Gi-Oh! 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 We're Yu-Gi-Oh!